Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Hearing Loops Don't Just Happen with Juliëtte Sterkens. I want to take a moment to thank our CART provider, Cindy Thompson of Alternative Communication Services. Thank you very much, Cindy. Juliëtte has been at it. We were just talking about this earlier. She's been at this since 2012. I can't believe it. And thanks to the Dave and Carol Myers Family Foundation for providing a grant so that Juliëtte can do her work as the hearing loop advocate for HLAA. There's loops everywhere, it seems, and I know that's not true. There's a long way to go, but it does seem that in just the short 6 years that you've been at it, that there's more and more HLA chapters that are getting involved with the Get in the Hearing Loop campaign. We're hearing of more loop installations in places that we would never have expected, like New York City taxi cabs. So it's all very exciting. And so I'm going to let you get started in just a moment. I just want to remind people that in the controls in the participants list next to your name, there's a way to raise your hand. We're not going to be able to use that tonight, but if you have a comment for me, please do use the chat box. You can send it directly to me if you have a question or comment. And then if you have a question for Juliëtte, please just use the Q&A if you see that in your controls. And at the end of Juliëtte's presentation, I'll go ahead and voice those questions to her so that they become part of our CART transcript, okay? So without further ado, Juliëtte, you should have control of the remote control, and it's all yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
I clicked, and let's see if it works. Good evening, everybody, and I'm really super excited to have everybody here. I hope that the information that I provide will be very helpful, and I'm just going to not touch anything for a moment here. I titled the webinar, Hearing Loops Don't Just Happen, and I'll tell you why that came about. I got called by a library to do a presentation in Janesville for the community in Janesville about hearing loops. And I contacted an audiologist in the area, and she said, would you come and do lunch with me to talk about hearing loops? And we went over to her office, and we sat down, and she looked at me, and she said, I was wondering when hearing loops were going to happen in Janesville. And I just kind of sat back and went, oh, wait, oh, hearing loops don't just happen, folks. You make them happen. But the fact that she thought that hearing loops were going to happen kind of made me realize that I had to present this in a certain way to providers to empower them, that they could make that change happen. And that's how I feel about how HLAA members can make a change happen. So you probably know some of my history. I attended a meeting in 2008, an HLAA meeting in Wisconsin, and David Myers came to speak, and he talked about hearing loops. And I sat in the back of the room. I observed 30, 40 HLAA members in Wisconsin, some of them having their first hearing loop moment. And I'm in the back of the room thinking, oh my God, this is the missing link. This is what's going to make my patients in Oshkosh help hear better. And so I stopped Dave as he was running out the door to catch another flight. And he said, here's my card, email me. And anybody who knows Dave Myers knows that he makes himself available, and I've probably emailed with him, 5,000 or 6,000 times. So Dave explained about the hearing loops in Western Michigan. So hearing loops, if you are, the benefits from hearing loops at the moment. Hearing loops broadcast audio much like my audio right now from my microphone is going to your speaker in your room, hearing loops broadcast the audio wirelessly to hearing aids through magnetic waves. And I have talked about that in other lectures, and there's all kinds of documentation online, so I'm not going to belabor that. But I am going to say that at the moment, hearing loops are by far the simplest system to operate. You don't need to pair, you don't need special equipment. Basically, you need a hearing aid with a T-coil. It's easy, relatively easy to do that if you know how to operate a push button. It's affordable. The loops or telecoils do not add any cost to the end user. Yes, they add cost to the venue that's going to install the loop. They're affordable, meaning that hearing aids, the telecoils and the hearing aids don't add any cost. They're currently available in a large number of hearing aids, and I have a slide coming up on where else or how else you can tie into hearing loops. They work in small situations, in big venues. They work in transient situations. They're flexible for the user. You can switch your hearing aid to telecoil only and only hear what's coming through the microphone, or you can switch your hearing aid to microphone and telecoil and hear what goes on around you. They're energy efficient. Telecoils do not take up any power, not any more than using a microphone on a hearing aid. They're universal. They work all around the world, as long as you have a hearing aid or a device with a telecoil. And at the moment, loops are it for assistive listening. They're the only universal, worldwide wireless system. And Bluetooth, even though it works quite well for wireless microphones and for your iPhone or for your smartphones, it is not a usable solution for large area listening. And of course, loops double the usefulness of hearing aids. And on top of that, users of hearing loops say that they can hear better than the person sitting beside them with quote unquote normal hearing. So it exceeds users' expectations. Now, if you're looking for information where there's clear documentation that users prefer hearing loops over any other assistive technology, and I'm talking about FM and infrared technology at the moment, you want to get a hold of these two documents written by Steve Fraser, where he documents what percentage of hearing aid and cochlear implant users prefer loops over FM or infrared systems. There are no studies out there that document that Bluetooth would be a viable option. So when I started my advocacy in Wisconsin, Nancy and I were just talking about that in late 2008, right after I had heard Dave Myers speak. There were about half a dozen hearing loops. And about 2 years later, about 24 places were looped in the Fox Valley. That's Oshkosh right there on the screen, about an hour south of Green Bay. And today, in 2018, we're over 640 hearing loop equipped venues in Wisconsin. But I am not the only reason this is happening. And this next slide kind of documents what is happening in Wisconsin, who is getting involved. HLAA members are advocating for loops. Librarians are advocating for loops. There's hearing loop installers who are also phenomenal advocates for hearing loops. Ministers are talking about hearing loops to their parishioners. And so you can see that these loops are happening in Wisconsin because a lot of people are getting involved. And this slide shows the hearing care professionals in Wisconsin who have gotten involved. Well-known audiologists and hearing instrument specialists like Todd Beyer, who will be president of IHS, Mike Thielen, my former business partner, Candy McGinnis, audiologists around the state who are talking about their patients, about the telecoil, the benefit from the telecoil. They activate the telecoil and they demonstrate telecoils, and then they send their patients into the world with a list saying, here, go try it out somewhere. Now, and if you ask experienced users, experienced hearing aid and cochlear implant users, and you say, do hearing loops improve your hearing aid satisfaction? Nearly 9 out of 10 respondents say yes, they agree with that statement. Now, there's a very small percentage, less than 5%, who were unhappy hearing loop users. But if you look at the reason why they were were unhappy, it's because they were using loops that were poorly installed or did not use proper microphones. And my survey, and in this case, over 400 people were surveyed, they were people all around the world. And some of the people who responded were people in the UK, where we know that some of the loops are not working properly. So there's also advantages for loops for the providers. And providers have told me it's a lot easier to tell people hearing aids work, but they work only in a limited situation. They don't work well in background noise. They don't work well over distance, but there's a workaround. Hearing loops are the perfect workaround. And so if you can counsel your patient and say, go to St. Mary's and turn on your telecoil and you will be able to hear, audiologists will spend less time counseling about those difficult situations. I think it also helps to set up more realistic expectations to the patient and to the family. You're just honestly telling them what hearing aids can and cannot do. Loops increase user satisfaction. I just showed that to you a couple slides ago, and this is good for providers in the hearing industry. But I also think that loops raise awareness for our cause. It raises awareness of hearing loss with the general public. And the general public generally just doesn't pay a lot of attention to wheelchair ramps or the lack thereof, or poor acoustics or background noise, unless they have somebody in the family who has hearing loss. I also think that hearing loops down the road will help pave the way for any future technology. That we are probably looking at a new wireless technology in 5 or 10 years, or maybe 15 years. There's no doubt about it. But in the meantime, those venues that have already installed hearing loops will have no trouble convincing them that they should also be installing a new green tooth technology. Who knows what that technology is going to be called? And I've also heard of providers that hearing loops make them excited, because it's wonderful that you know that you can make your patients hear so much better with the use of a hearing loop. Now, over 400 people said or responded to a question on my survey, where would you like to see looped venues? And the number, 3 places are theaters, auditorias, and arenas, meeting rooms, classrooms, and places of worship. And then there's certainly a lot of complaints about people who have trouble hearing at checkout counters, library desks, information desks, ticket counters, and places like that. But here are some of the places on that list where hearing loops have been installed, where they can be installed, and where you, if you are watching this webinar because you would like to foster more hearing loops, may want to start thinking where you could perhaps focus your attention. So, how are we going to get your community in the hearing loop? And first rule, first item on the agenda is that you can't go at this alone. There's just no way. And in the next few slides, I'm going to be throwing a lot of information out at you. And that doesn't mean that your hearing loop committee has to have one of each member, but I'm just giving you ideas of who could be on your hearing loop committee. It could be your fellow chapter members. It could also be an Au.D or say what members. It might be somebody from a service organization like Rotary, somebody who has hearing loss and to whom this is near and dear to their heart. I'm seeing people joining loop committees who have a spouse, for example, who's hard of hearing. Community foundation members, members of the clergy, librarians, or a local loop installer. But if you look at some of the loop committees, and now I'm thinking particularly of the loop committee in Minnesota, they have exactly some of those members on their committee. And then what you want to do in your community is kind of smooth the way, all right? And one of the first steps is going to be an article in the upcoming Hearing Life magazine called America is Getting in the Hearing Loop. And it's a 3-part article. Steve Frazier wrote a wonderful article about what's happening with looping in the United States. It's a 2-page article. And the 3rd page is a letter that you can sign, cut out of the magazine, you can sign and take to your provider, because you want to appeal to your local audiologist, your local hearing instrument provider, that hearing loops and telecoils are important. If we don't tell them, how are they going to find out? So that letter is one way that you, if you're looking to perhaps get your chapter involved, make copies of the letter. And just the first step is everybody approach their hearing care provider with this letter. We're also going to have copies of this letter available for you at the convention. Another way to smooth the way would be to educate your audiologist. And believe it or not, there's still audiologists who are happily unaware of what's happening with the hearing loop movement in the United States. And these are 2 articles. So one was written for Audiology Today by myself. The other one was written by Mary Cacavo, an audiologist in Indiana. They're written by audiologists for audiologists and hearing care providers, how to foster hearing loops in the community. They're easy reads. And so why not make a copy and add that to your letter that you're going to hand carry to your provider. And then here's another way to get your local provider involved. And this is a letter that I copied from somebody in Kalamazoo. He called his letter Loop the Zoo in Kalamazoo. And the letter is very short, very brief, to the point. And when it says under the heading what, it's a quick meeting, how to easily help your patients advocate for themselves. And we will provide you with materials to distribute to your patients. And then a little bit lower on that letter, this will not require much on your behalf. So this HLAA member, Richard Adwell, made copies of that letter with his team and provided it to every dispenser, every audiologist in the Kalamazoo and Battle Creek area to educate them about what's happening with the hearing loop movement. And we're happy to share that letter with you so you could do that in your community. And then the other step that you definitely want to work on a little bit is to develop and practice an elevator speech. Explain how hearing aids work, but that hearing aids have limitations, but that hearing loops can overcome those limitations by wirelessly sending audio direct to telecoils found in most hearing aids and all cochlear implants, and how they work for everyone. And how they can work is with a hearing aid and a telecoil, with a cochlear implant. Oops, and I now see that I don't have a picture of a cochlear implant on my slide. They can work with a loop listener and headphones. They can work with streamer devices. Those are the three images in the middle of the slide that pick up the loop signal and broadcast it to the hearing aid. Or the latest invention are headphones that have a telecoil that, when plugged into an iPhone, allow any iPhone user to hear directly in a hearing loop. So there's just a phenomenal way to let people experience what a hearing loop can do, even if they don't wear hearing aids. And I use that app all the time. Another way that you as a consumer can talk about hearing loops is to demonstrate it, to give a person who has normal hearing an audio experience of what it is like to listen with a hearing aid, to hear all that background noise. And there's, and I'm just showing you a couple of screenshots when I Googled YouTube and hearing loops. One is a video developed by Richard Einhorn. I put a video in a church, that's the bottom left image. Then there is a short video that explains what a hearing loop is. You can just, grab your iPhone and whip them up on your iPhone and let people listen. I also have a series of sound files that I'm happy to send you if you have an iPhone. And it just allows me very quickly to let people listen in and out of a hearing loop by just demonstrating those sound files. And I can tell you that lots of people for whom I've played those demos, it's an eye opener or an ear opener. They just haven't given that any thought, that hearing aids pick up all the background noise, and that with a hearing loop you can cut through that background noise. So that is one way to quickly give normal hearing people a demonstration of what it sounds like in a hearing loop. Now, your hearing loop committee then could create your own local hearing loop wish list. You may want to make a list, and in Oshkosh, that was the Oshkosh Grand Opera House. For me, it was some retirement community centers, churches. My church was high on my list, and I literally lobbied, but I also made my patients lobby. And you can't just say, I want to loop Oshkosh, Wisconsin. You want to kind of focus in on what, some of the loop advocates have called low-hanging fruit. Now, keep in mind that hearing loops will only work in places where they can be connected to a microphone and a PA system. Now, right now I'm using a microphone. Obviously, there's no PA system in that room or in this room, but where a PA system is installed, loops are definitely going to be very advantageous. So you want to focus on places that have PA systems in use. And I know that in Florida, in Sarasota, I think they assigned some people to answer inquiries per venue. So you may have one person on your committee who is going to answer inquiries for churches, and they have all the handouts and a standard letter available that they can send out, whereas somebody else might be focused on retirement communities, perhaps because they live in a retirement community. And you definitely want to be familiar with some of these educational handouts. These were just updated by me. I don't think they are on the web yet with that new logo, but I'll make sure HLA National gets a copy. One are the frequently asked questions handout that David Myers developed already several years ago. And on the right is a handout on how to purchase or how to procure a hearing loop, kind of the steps that venues have to go through to make sure that they get a loop that meets their needs. So you want to definitely read those handouts and have those available in your toolbox, shall we say. Some other handouts, and I already showed you the one on the left that shows that consumers prefer hearing loops over any other type of assistive technology. And on the right is a handout that has fostered more hearing loops than anywhere else in churches around the country, and that is an article by David Myers, Let's Loop America's Worship Centers. And if you want a supply of those handouts, loop installers can provide those to you, and I'm happy to provide it to you in a digital format. So now, step number two, now that you've worked on your committee, we're going to talk a little bit about cultivating loop installers. And if you're lucky to have a loop installer in your area, you want to cultivate a relationship with that loop installer. You want to make sure that the installer knows that you're very interested in learning of new installations so that you can keep a list of hearing loops in the area. You can also support the hearing loop installer by providing inserts for church bulletins, or perhaps a news release, a cartoon, or those educational handouts. But once in a while, loop installers run into roadblocks. They are not the ones who are hard of hearing. They are installing loops for you, and that means that you, as an advocate, sometimes will have to jump into gear to provide a letter of support for the technology. And just tell loop installers that you are willing to support his efforts should he need a testimonial or a letter explaining why hearing loops work so well for you. And you definitely want to communicate with the loop installer on how to, or make sure that he installs proper signage, encourage that venues mention the hearing loop on their websites, encourage that the loop installer mention to places that loop dedications are important, and that alone could be another whole webinar. But I have a handout for anybody who's interested on loop dedications. You want to perhaps lend your ear for field testing. We live in a retirement community, and they just had a hearing loop installed. And for the final checkup, the loop installer called us in, or called me in, with my hearing aid in my ear so that I could give it a thumbs up or thumbs down sign and talk about proper use of the microphone. And you, with your hearing aids, would provide very valuable feedback to loop installers. And the last part might be hard to read, but recognize that installers need to make a living. And that doesn't mean they have a right to make a killing off your hearing loss, but loop installations can be quite costly at times. And the cost is determined very much by the area where the installer is doing business, but also by the size of the venue, the amount of metal in the building, whether the loop can be a perimeter loop or needs to be a phased array hearing loop to overcome metal in the building so that there is a strong magnetic signal that the telecoil in the hearing aid can pick up. Now, if you are looking for loop installers, there are loop distributors, loop equipment distributors, Contacta and Listen Technologies, that will share their, if you email them, and I am happy to provide you with email addresses, they will share the nearest loop installers with you in the area. Now, if there are no loop installers in a wide area, it may be up to you to reach out to AV companies and make the pitch. There were no loop installers in Wisconsin other than my husband, who offered to put loops in Oshkosh, but never thought he'd be looping the whole state. I literally picked up the phone and started calling audio companies saying, hey, why are you not doing hearing loop installations when it's clearly a very beneficial technology for people who wear hearing aids. And with every audio engineer I spoke, they had a connection. They knew somebody who was hard of hearing. They had a hard of hearing family member. They wanted to learn more. They were unaware that loops were making a comeback, that there was a better loop standard out there. So you may be the one who gets an audio company interested in doing loop installations in your area. So then if you have a committee, you want to keep an updated list of looped venues. And I know for a fact that some groups have made two lists, but they put them on one page. On the top is a list of installed hearing loops in XYZ city, and that might be, it's very small print, but there's 4 or 5 loops on that little list in the middle of the page. But on the right side is a list of venues that are contemplating putting a loop in, or that have been measured for a hearing loop. So if you know that St. Raphael's Catholic Church has been measured for a hearing loop, and that is your church, that should be your impetus to then start lobbying the church for a hearing loop. And so having that dual list, installed loops and measured but not yet installed venues, can be very helpful in nudging places forward. And then if you do create a local list, you can then send local hearing care providers a link. You can put it on Facebook. If you have a website for your state or for your local chapter, you can just update that list on a regular basis to show that hearing loops are happening in your area. So soon, hopefully very soon, it'll be easier to keep a loop list up to date, and that's because Google has expressed some interest in having loops listed on their Google accessibility site. And that would be absolutely wonderful, because then you'd be able to see where loops are located just using your smartphone. Now, for those of you who'd like to know how that works, if you go to the loopminnesota.com website, they have a Google map. If you scroll down, they already have a Google map showing the different venues that have hearing loops installed in the area. And I'm working to integrate Wisconsin with the Minnesota map. So if that's one of the 2 states that you live in, hopefully soon you'll be getting these updates on a regular basis. Now, how to give this community, or give these hearing loops some PR, because I think that's where I've been very fortunate, but where I've also put in a fair amount of energy, and that is I have informed the community in the newspaper, on Facebook, how hearing loops benefit consumers and users. So I have written multiple letters to the editor of the newspaper, and frequently newspapers publish these letters. It's free PR, it's good PR, especially if these testimonials are coming from you. So a letter saying kudos to the Grand Opera House for installing a hearing loop will make more people aware. It also, sends goodwill to the venue that gets mentioned in that letter. You may also want to consider a letter to your hearing care provider, or post something on their Facebook thanking them that they provided you with a hearing aid that has a telecoil because you were able to hear every word during your son's spelling bee. I'm just giving an example here. But thank you letters, verbally and publicly thanking people for these hearing loops makes a difference. And I just can't stress it enough. Can't stress it enough. Other ideas, how to get your community in the loop, public speaking. And that isn't everybody's cup of tea. But I'm finding that local service clubs, local church groups are very willing to have you come and present about hearing loops or about this new technology that helps people hear so much better. Everybody knows somebody with hearing loss, if it isn't a neighbor or a friend or a parent. And they simply just don't know how beneficial hearing loops can be. And public speaking can make all the difference. So I know that HLA members have been to professional meetings, and I'm thinking the Michigan meeting, the MAA meeting, or I think it's maybe the MAC meeting, the Michigan Audiology Coalition meeting. They've done the same thing in Minnesota, where Monique Hammond and her group have attended the Minnesota audiology meetings at a table, talking about their HLAA group, talking about the Loop Minnesota group, and having materials for audiologists to take back to their offices. Learning and retirement groups are another great place to get that word out. And I mentioned Rotary, Lions, Sartoma, all kinds of service clubs. PEO meetings, I've given several lectures to women's groups, PEO meetings. And again, it's just education of educating educated people about this technology. Clergy gatherings. And again, if you come armed with materials, you'd be surprised how these little nuggets, these little drops, these dimes that we're dropping are being heard. And again, in your community, that might be another organization, but I'm just giving you some options here. And then, of course, where to find funding. If you do a Walk for Hearing fund and you end up with some funding for Walk for Hearing, you may find that you can leverage your Walk for Hearing funds by going to a local community organization and saying, we have $3,000 from our local Walk for Hearing fund. Would you be willing to match that funding because we would like to foster hearing loops in the community? And I found that my local community foundation was very receptive. In fact, they helped fund one of the first hearing loops in this area when there were 0 hearing loops in Oshkosh. So local community foundation, even just having the conversation and dropping off some material. Local philanthropic organizations. Oshkosh is home of Miles Kimball. It's perhaps not as big as what it used to be, but it used to be a mail order, a catalog company. And Miles Kimball and Alberta Kimball are Oshkosh residents, and they have a family foundation in their own name. And we have a high school auditorium named after Alberta Kimball. So I lobbied their foundation, and they helped fund the hearing loop in the high school auditorium. Again, reaching out to organizations and people who have the funding, who perhaps might be in a stage in their life where they are wanting and capable of making a difference in their community. There's grant funding available for libraries. We use that very heavily in Wisconsin, the LSTA grant, the Library Services Technology Act. It's federally funded. It's handled in different states in different ways. But I believe that over 80 libraries in Wisconsin have used that LSTA grant funding to foster hearing loops at service desks and in meeting rooms. And then I also found out that audiology and hearing care providers are willing to help fund hearing loops, particularly if it gets their name on the hearing loop installation. So if a hearing loop gets installed in a community room and it says local hearing loop funded by ABC Audiology, that might be a reason for them to make a donation. Sartoma, Rotary, and other service organizations are also willing to help donate or make donations towards hearing loops. And if you are in a situation where you would like to foster a hearing loop, let's say in your own house of worship, my experience is that if you earmark donations, you make a donation in the form of a check, but you say may only be used towards a hearing loop, that too can help foster hearing loops. So really, and I kind of zoomed through my slides here, but these loops don't just happen. You know, hearing loops are made to happen by a variety of groups and advocates, and that means you who's watching the webinar. It could be the loop installers, it's the hearing care providers, but I believe that if we all work together, we can make this happen. So I know that HLAA has a ton of resources on the website, and that includes videos. There's several videos online where that are even captioned, where I talk to audiologists, where I talk to consumers, if you want to just kind of see a little bit different angle. And I'm happy to share those video links with you. But probably the most useful links are right here on your screen. They're from HLAA. They're Dr. Meyer's website, hearingloop.org, and my website, Loop Wisconsin. If you don't see on the website what you're looking for, email me, because you can't think of it and somebody has asked me this question, and I'm really here to help you and to kind of guide you along. The hardest loop is the first one. And then once you get that first one in, you can start nudging and leveraging that first hearing loop to foster a second hearing loop. And if you look at the list in Wisconsin or in Oshkosh alone, I think we're over 60 hearing loops. And people call me and say, how do we get a hearing loop in a church? And I provide that information. So that kind of concludes my slides.
Wonderful presentation, Juliette.
Yeah,
If you'll
you're
just
welcome.
leave that last one up there, because I know people are probably busy writing that down. I've had some questions about how to get the materials that you've mentioned or that you've shown on your slides. And I think a lot of them are already posted on our website. If not, we can go ahead and post those resources along with a copy of your slides when we post the replay of this webinar.
Okay.
And I know that the Getting the Hearing Loop committee is really working hard on developing toolkits that will have all of these things in them. There's going to be one, I understand, for houses of worship and different venues. I'm not sure those are going to be ready by the time we launch our new website in the next month or so. But they will be coming. I know that they're hard at work on those, and so we'll have a lot of resources available.
Yeah, and we tend to be very eager, and of course we think more is better. So there's a number of handouts out there. But if you're looking for something specific, like for an Episcopal church or for a temple or for a senior center, I can steer you in the right direction so you don't have to wade through all those different resources.
Okay, that's great. All right, now I have to ask, before we get to the other questions, you mentioned a PEO meeting. What does that stand for?
That is a philanthropic educational organization.
Got it.
It's women. It's a women's group.
Okay. All right. Well, that's taken care of. All right. I'm going to ask you some of the questions that have been posted here. And they're all really good questions, so I'm glad people took the time to write them. Jim would like to say that he's installing a loop system in their church, and in preparing for that to happen, he's finding that a large number of people that wear hearing aids, first of all, may not know whether or not they have a telecoil, and secondly, even if they do, they don't know how to turn it on. Is that typical? I know it's not typical of HLLA members because we've educated about the benefits of telecoil technology. So what should he do?
You know, believe it or not, hearing aids can be very overwhelming. And I hear from audiologists, they will touch on a lot of different features in hearing aids, but we forget. You know, hearing is believing. And if only every audiologist had a loop in their waiting room and let the person go into the waiting room, push the button and hear it, people wouldn't forget. They would have had the experience. And more audiologists are installing hearing loops in their waiting rooms. But I have a handout for that. I have a little handout
I should have
that
known.
consumers can take to their audiologist that explains that their church or their senior center is getting a loop. How can they benefit from the hearing loop with the hearing aid that they already have in their ear? So that is definitely a handout that we need to post.
Mm-hmm. Also, we have the checklist for consumers in purchasing a hearing aid posted on our website. If you can't find it, email me for it because it's a little bit hidden. But that's also a really great checklist to take to your audiologist so that you know what questions to ask, including, you know, that about a telecoil. So that's good information to pass along. It can be downloaded directly from our website.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike would like to know, he says, I need to better understand why you think that Bluetooth is not applicable. Bluetooth is a transmission scheme, and what the user hears depends on what is transmitted. This is true of loops as well. We use Roger equipment and are very happy with it. I think what you meant is that Bluetooth is not applicable for large areas.
Correct. Bluetooth is currently not ready for large area listening. From what I gather, it's going to require, at the moment, Bluetooth can only work through your smartphone, and then the smartphone transmits the signal to hearing aids. That introduces a delay between the phone and the hearing aid. Does not work very well with Android phones. So it really only works well for iPhone users. It doesn't work over large areas at the moment. It takes up a lot of power and it's not universal yet. So if the hearing aid industry would come up with a standard that would work with every make, model, hearing aid and cochlear implant, loop advocates would be all over it. We're not necessarily for loops. We are for technology that is easy to use and universally applicable. And with Bluetooth technology, we're not that yet there. Now, from what I understand, it could be 5 to 10 years, but they said the same thing to me back in 2008. Oh, Bluetooth will be available in 5 to 10 years. Well, we are now 10 years later, and it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
We're not there yet.
Margaret has asked for all the materials she can possibly get her hands on. So Margaret, if you're still listening there, please note Juliette's email address and ask her directly. I will try to remember to email you, but I'd rather it be the reverse. I would rather you email Juliette, and anybody else who wants specific things that Juliette has mentioned tonight. She's got a million resources, and somehow she keeps them all organized and can send you exactly what you're looking for to address the issue that you're facing in your community. Michelle says, are there any other sheets of information on the correct use of microphones, etc., to ensure the best use of hearing loops?
Garbage in, garbage out. It's a very good question. And that means that once the loop is in, you may have to literally educate people that hanging a microphone on the ceiling is still not going to be any better than you having your hearing aid trying to reach for the sound. And sometimes a demonstration is worth 1,000 words. And I'm sorry? Is there a document? Yes, there's a document written by Richard Einhorn, how to use microphones and do proper sound mixing. There's an absolute wonderful video online called Like the Mic, and that was fostered by Sherry Perizzoli's group in Seattle, Washington. Captioned, makes it very, very clear that microphones are an integral part of the hearing loop system.
Michelle, if you can't find that video online, email me. We promoted that video, I believe it was last summer. Time flies. I think it was last summer during the convention, right before the convention.
Yes, I think so too.
So if you cannot find it, let me know and I will dig out the link to that. Dave says, 2 problems of looping are finding qualified vendors and the cost. I can't find any vendors on the San Francisco Peninsula. Installations at 2 churches using an installer from outside of the area cost about $7,000 each, including receivers for those not wearing hearing aids or using a telecoil. He then quit doing loops, so maintenance has been an issue. Do you have any recommendations on this?
Yeah. The $5,000 or $7,000 is not an uncommon number, particularly if it involves a phased array hearing loop. I mean, I've heard of loops in large venues or churches that can run $10,000, $15,000. Again, if you were to reach out to audio companies or email me and I'll get you in contact with the loop manufacturer or the distributors of hearing loop equipment. I am aware of at least 2 installers in California, but I realize it's a big state. But some of them are working and cover a fairly large geographic area. So you're right. In some areas, it's more difficult to find vendors than in others. But I know that the loop distributors, the loop equipment distributors, are working on training AV people. So if you reach out to an AV company, you can tell them there are companies that do hearing loop training online and in person. So if they are wanting to learn more, there is training available.
You've made loops take off so quickly, Juliette. That's probably one of the reasons there's a lack of installers, because they just can't keep up.
They're all in Wisconsin.
Right. They've all moved to Wisconsin. In fact, Carol Agate would like you, she says you've been in Wisconsin long enough. You and Max should move to the Boston area.
Carol, you know what? We don't like the traffic where you live.
I bet not. What about hearing loops in workplaces? I think we're all very spoiled here at the national office because we have a loop installed in our conference room, and we can use the hearing loop for small or larger meetings. This is where our board of trustees meets twice a year. So how would you get your employer to install a loop, say, in a conference or meeting room?
It's certainly part of a reasonable accommodation, and as such is covered under the ADA. I have found that nudging and gentle persuasion initially works best. You don't want to immediately pull out the big guns, but you want to explain how it works and that it works. Again, have your iPhone with your sound demos available. And I know of larger employers who have installed the technology, but perhaps, and I'm just thinking, if you are the only person in that place who's using a hearing aid, then perhaps a more economical system might be a Roger pen. Because now you can take your Roger pen to different rooms, whereas a loop is only installed in one room and stays there. Um, Checking with your audiologist to see if a clip-on microphone or a mini mic, as they're called, is an option for your particular hearing aid system. I know that under DVR, I have fit people with FM systems, and they were covered by the state because they were considered a reasonable accommodation under the law. Again, email me and I might be able to give you some ammunition how to, best go forward with your particular employer. But you're right. The frustrating thing is the onus is on you. If there was only the ADA police out there going around, giving people tickets, it doesn't happen that way, unfortunately.
Right. Dave asked if HLAA could keep a list of known loops state by state on its website. We did that several years ago, and we found that we just could not keep it up to date.
No.
Nor could we vet that installer or venue to make sure that the loop was installed according to the standards.
Yeah.
And we certainly didn't want to post anything that wasn't up to speed. So hopefully Google will figure this out and be able to put that's exciting. I didn't know that. So that's really
there's a meeting planned on Friday about this very issue.
Well, we will definitely publicize that far and wide if that happens. That'd be great.
Yeah. And one more comment. If there are people who are techie and who are willing to undertake this in their own state, I have instructions on how to do this, and I'm happy to share it so that you can create your own mini Google map, because once we have established these lists of loops in your area, it'll be easy to share it with Google accessibility.
Is that something that we should post somewhere, Juliette, on our website or in e-news or something like that?
Let me talk to the person who emailed that information to me, but I'm certainly willing to share it privately.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. There's so many questions that are coming up now that we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'll take this last one. And then if there's any burning questions that you just didn't get answered tonight, email me or email Juliette. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer your questions. Any special advice for getting public meeting rooms of cities or counties looped?
Persuasion, and there's strength in numbers. There's absolutely strength in numbers. And I just saw a little comment flash up from Dave. Thanks, Dave, for reminding me. There are already 2 national websites that try to list every hearing loop in the country. One is called ALD Locator, Assistive Listening Device Locator.com, ALDlocator.com. The other one is called loopfinder.com, but I'm finding they're not complete. So you may find some loops on one side and not on the other. Mm-hmm. We're really trying to make this one national list so we don't run into competing organizations or private organizations.
Mm-hmm. This webinar, as I mentioned, is recorded, so we will have it posted on our website. I'd like to think that we could do that by the end of next week. And we'll post also with Juliette's slides so that you can take a look at those again separately if you don't want to, hit the replay button. And some of the articles that she talked to as well. We will post as much as we can on that replay page. And This has been great, Juliette. I'm sorry that we cannot get to all the questions. It's definitely a hot topic, so we will definitely have to schedule another follow-up webinar and and answer all the rest of the questions here.
Yeah, you know, or write them down and I'll try to get to them. Definitely, if anyone is attending the national conference, you know, it's in the Midwest. Woohoo, I can drive there. I'm going to bring all kinds of handouts, so come with a suitcase and take handouts from me. But there's going to be at least 4 different lectures on looping at the national conference this year.
And the early bird deadline is just in 10 days. So HLA members, of course, get a discount on registration. And if we have any veterans in the audience with hearing loss, veterans receive a complimentary registration. So it's the least we can do, and we're proud to be able to do that for veterans.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Juliette. And
my pleasure.
Cindy, for providing CART this evening. And we'll see you next time. Good night.
Good night. I think, are we still on?
If you'll just give me the remote, I can go ahead and
how do I do that again? Leave meeting?
stop the recording.
Oh,
Remote control.
okay. I have no idea. Oh, I'm doing it again.
Where you see remote control.
View options. Give up remote control. It's so Dutch. You know, I want to keep control.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you get it back?
Yeah, I think so.
Good. Good, good. It's just a lot easier to talk when you have a whole audience in front of you. You know that.
Let's see, for some reason I'm still recording.